a lot of great things coming up. And little by little, I've been parking these things over on IGTV on Instagram. And of course, they're always archived over here on YouTube. So check out all the shows. We're having a blast. And no other real announcements at the moment. I could go on, but I have an awesome guest waiting in the wings. And my guest tonight is Brian Dunne, who is currently and a long-standing tenure, the drummer for Daryl Hall and Daryl's Place and Hall and Oates, and he's out on tour with Hall and Oates right now. I think they have a couple of weeks off, so he's been really generous with his time, and he's going to hang with me tonight. And Brian also does a lot of recording, and his studio is Back of the Bus Productions, where he does live drum recording, remote sessions for musicians, and his website is in the description of this video, so go over to his website, check it out. He's also played with an unbelievable amount of artists, great artists, but I was looking at some of the people he's played with in the past, and I saw the Brecker brothers on there, so Michael and Randy Brecker, Bob James, Jessica Simpson, the Main Ingredient, Lenny Stern. So maybe I saw you with Lenny Stern at the 55 bar way back when, maybe. I don't know. India Arie, there's a lot of people on this list. So I want to get into it. And I'm going to pull him up in just a minute. We're going to give him, because for Ryan Brown, I felt like I was reading, I felt like he was on the dating game. So we're going to play the dating game music. Brian Dunne. All right, enough of that. Brian Dunne, thanks for hanging tonight, man. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
We finally made it happen. I know we've been trying for a little while, not too long, trying a few dates here and there, but you've been a busy man out on the road. I do have to mention that my good buddy Jim Mola started a Facebook page called Brian Dunne is a Badass. So if you're watching this, go over to Facebook and join the group. This stream will be reposted there. I promise you that. So you know Jim Mola, right?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So his sense of humor, man.
He's great.
He's
amazing.
He's so funny, man. And so when he put that page up, I was like, yes, Jim is always on it with some shenanigans. So you and I both played with the same club date band, and then the funny thing is, I had to sub it out because my daughter was getting married. So you played my daughter's wedding.
Yep.
So that's like kind of a crazy thing.
And Greg Faline's our common denominator, right?
That's right. Greg is the common denominator, kind of like with all the drummers that were connected with, at least with that office. And so you played my daughter's wedding. Besides doing Hall and Oates, that's your other claim to fame is playing my daughter's wedding.
Nice.
And I appreciate that because, of course, it was killing. So, and you're a New York guy. I'm a New York guy. You're out of Long Island.
Yep.
So I want to get your story because I don't really know like your early story, and so I want to kind of get the whole picture. Like when, how, what happened? How did you wind up getting into drums? Like, and what is the first aha moment where you went, oh wow, drums? Even if it was just a start.
I mean, I grew up in a house I'm the youngest of 7, and my 2 brothers, my brother John was a guitar player, my brother Kevin is a drummer. And by the time my brother John was in college, he became a drummer as well. So there's 3 drummers in the house. But when they were teenagers, they're like 6, 7 years older than me. There were band rehearsals in my house all the time. So I was just kind of around it all the time. I would be sitting at the top of the staircase and kind of watching, looking down on, them playing music. And so, yeah, I mean, it was the norm, So I've been playing, I would go down on the kit and just play and, whatever my brothers were listening to, I would be listening to. And that was it. Yeah. So I just kind of followed the brothers.
So as being the youngest, what were they listening to at the time? And how old would you say this was about for you?
When I was probably in 4th grade, they were listening to Bad Company. That was like
Okay.
Bad Company was king in my house.
Yeah.
Um, Bad Company and a lot of the usual stuff, Zeppelin. It was a lot of rock and roll.
Yeah.
Um, and then that turned into R&B pretty quickly. Actually, right around the time that they were listening to R&B, they also discovered Rush. So
Oh wow.
I can remember when I was in sixth grade, I used to play along with the Hemispheres record, that record in particular.
Yes.
I remember Pat playing along with like playing the trees.
Yeah, man. Oh
I
my
didn't know what
God.
they were talking about. It was way over my head. The playing was probably over my head, but I was playing to it.
Right.
Um, and so yeah, it was just a lot of putting. We had a stereo system in our house that we could. I never had to wear headphones. It was loud enough that I could just play drums along with the music.
Nice.
And my parents were cool. It didn't matter how loud stuff was, as long as we stopped by 9 o'clock at night. And yeah, so it went from basically rock and roll, and then to more, I guess, complicated rock, and that turned into R&B. And so there was the Earth, Wind and Fire. Like that's my, nothing's my favorite, but I mean that might be.
Yeah.
It's hard to think of anything better than Earth, Wind and Fire. But Earth, Wind and Fire, Stevie Wonder, all that stuff. And then my brother Kevin, by the time I was in, I guess, my early years of high school, he got into anything that Michael Brecker was on, essentially.
Oh.
So he started going more toward the jazz routes. And ironically, like I'm sure the same thing happened to you. It happens to a lot of us. We get into jazz in a backward kind of way. So I was listening to when we discovered who Steve Gadd was, that meant that we found out who Al Jarreau was and who Chick Corea was. So we were like, I was backing my way into jazz, and then even the jazz that I started to listen to wasn't the early stuff; it was the later stuff.
Yeah.
So we went through our the whole Gadd phase, and that opened all of us to all these different artists he played with, and eventually he really got into straight ahead. And he went out and bought the Clifford Brown and Max Roach records, and I was listening to that and listening to Tony, and then it took a long time to get back to listening to like Philly Joe. I was listening to Tony before I was listening to Philly Joe Jones, which is kind of crazy, but it's just the way it worked out, But it was cool because it made all of us, we had to start asking the question when we started to get serious about it. It was like, wait a second, if I'm listening to Tony, like what was he listening to? And then you realize like, oh, he was listening to Philly and to Max. And so then I had to go backwards again. So that's the order of things. The R&B thing never really left me though. So ultimately, even though I like to play all different kinds of music, playing kind of R&B and funky kind of music is the one mainstay for me. And the last thing I'll say about the jazz thing is there was a time period where I got pretty heavy into it, and I really fell in love with like I was listening to the Branford Marsalis records with Jeff Tain Watts and Marvin Smitty Smith, like that era of players. And then I started getting into Brian Blade and Bill Stewart. And at that point, I was like, if I can't sound like Bill Stewart, I don't think I love this music enough to continue doing it. So like him and Brian are so exactly what I want to hear, that I decided, there was a point where I decided like, I don't know if I can do that. Or maybe one day, 50 years from now I could, but I wasn't ready to commit what you need to commit to that,
right,
to get that going. And I loved R&B music so much. So it in a weird way, as much as they inspired me, and they still do, and I still work on it, there was a point where I moved a little bit away from trying to do the straight ahead thing. And it was because of how great they are.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, Bill Stewart, I remember seeing him the first time with John Scofield. I think it was at the Vanguard, and just going like, "Holy crap!" Like, just his fluidity and the way he plays is just so interesting. and lyrical and
Groovy.
melodic and
Oh,
grooving so hard. And you're just
yeah.
like, holy. And as far as like your firsts, I want to look at some firsts. So did you
Okay.
like do the school band thing? Um, yeah. So that was
I did
happening.
all, yeah, I did the NISMA thing where you play the snare drum solos and all county and all state and so I did that whole thing. And I was reading very early, actually. My brother told me that I should take, my brother taught me when I was very young. And by the time I was in, I think, sixth grade, I went and studied with Al Miller.
Oh, okay, cool.
And yeah, and I did, I think, a year and a half with him. And I was dying to play the drum set. When I would go to his house, there'd be two drum sets set up, and we never touched the drums once.
Practice
But
pad.
we did, yeah, it's the Barcudo. But it was great. I mean, I look back, and it was great because it helped me a lot. It helped me a lot. And I don't know that I ever got anything deeper reading. And in terms of my reading, it was like I was reading the same stuff in sixth grade that I was in college.
Right.
It was like it didn't get. I mean, it became different, and interpreting a chart's a whole nother ball game.
Yeah.
But in terms of snare drum repertoire, if you're playing level six NISMA, if you're really playing it, it doesn't get. I mean, I guess when you go to college, some of the classical repertoire becomes a little more difficult. But in terms of reading rhythms,
Right.
I was doing that with Al very, very young, and we were doing the independence thing with, like sort of like the Jim Chapin style book, but Al had his own stuff as well. So yeah, I did the whole school thing, and I wound up going to college. I went to Nassau Community College for 2 years and studied with the great Ron Gould. He was
Oh,
amazing. Yeah, same guy that Rod Morgenstein studied with
yeah.
him, and another Long Island guy, and Tommy Breckline. Um, and he was that guy who was pretty amazing. He was pretty amazing because he was a straight up classical guy. And I remember my brother went there before me, and my brother used to come home on a weekly basis blown away by something that this guy did.
Wow.
And by the time I graduated high school, I went I went to Ron, and I remember meeting him for the first time. I had the Cerrone book, that
I
red
was going to
covered
mention
book,
that. Yeah.
right? So I went in there with the Cerrone book, and I had done everything in the thing before I had gotten there, because my brother would just come home and show me whatever Ron was working on him with.
Right.
And so I go for my first lesson, and "Oh, I like that book. Can you play something in there?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, he goes, "What did you prepare?" I go, "I could play anything in here." he's like, he's like, "Really? Okay,
There's
let's
only
give me."
50 solos, right?
He takes the book and he opens it up, and he gives it to me, and I'm playing on a pad, and I play the piece, and I knew how heavy he was, so I was nervous, but I played the piece, and I really, really thought I did a great job.
Right.
And he sat back, and he said to me, he said, "Oh, very good. Your hands, I don't think there's nothing, I don't see any problems there. You read all the rhythms accurately. You have really good time. You played with dynamics. Yeah, yeah, very good, very good. You know very little about music, but I can work with you." And then he turned around, and he started going rummaging through his bag or something, and I was shocked now. This is all by design, of course. And he looks at me, and he goes, "Listen, play the first phrase you see there." And already it was a foreign language to me.
Right.
I was like, "First phrase?" He's like, "Oh." And he goes, "Listen," he goes, "look at that first line." He goes, "Those first four bars there," he goes, "that's a phrase. That's a statement right there." He's like, "What are you going to do with it?" He goes, "Are you just going to play it?" He goes, I'm not impressed that you can play that. There's a lot of guys can do that." He's like, "What are you going to do with it?" And he goes, "Come here, let me show you." And he leaned over, and he played it. And he played the exact same thing at the exact same tempo, and it sounded 50 million times better than me. And I was like, wow. And every week for 2 years was like that with this cat.
Wow.
It was pretty awesome. And it was always about the bigger picture. It was always music at the end of the day.
Right.
So I take his stuff with me everywhere I go. And he knew that he's like, "You're not going to follow this classical thing, are you?" And he's like, "But that's all right." He's like, "You're going to go play your drums?" That's okay, but you're going to carry this stuff with you. And he's right. And I really did. So I can remember, I even remember my brother had a marimba set up in the basement that he rented from him when he was in college.
Oh,
And I remember he was playing, like, he had this Bach, it was, I think, a Bach partita, and he used to practice it, but I wasn't reading music I wasn't reading melody. I was just reading rhythms at that point. And I never did any of that in high school. I was just the snare drum player on everything, right?
right.
And I remember going down and I learned the piece. I just learned it by ear, but the problem is I learned it in the wrong key because I wasn't reading. So, and it was a problem that stuck with me. That was the thing about Mr. Gould. Like, you go there and I'd have to prepare a mallet piece for the week. A 4-line piece. It was always violin repertoire that you play as a mallet player.
Right.
Before you get into 4 mallets, it's just single line stuff. So it's a lot of 16th notes, and
yep.
So it's a lot of violin music. And I can remember, like, if I play it more than 5 times, I'm memorizing it now. I'm not even trying. It just happens, And he was a stickler. Like, in the real world, he's the kind of guy that was being hired to play, like, on Tom and Jerry cartoons. Like,
right.
Dudes were reading that stuff, right? So your eyes have to move from the keyboard to the paper and back and forth. You have to have some peripheral vision going. And, he didn't care if I played it great, and because I memorized it, he wanted me to work on the skill set of looking back and forth and having a feel for the keyboard. And he tortured me, but not too bad. Again, because he knew like I wasn't headed for, like, he pushed a lot of guys that went through Nassau to go to Crane or to go to Queens College.
Right.
And he also pushed the whole music ed thing, because he knew how difficult this game is. But with me, he tortured me just enough, but he knew that I was gonna. My mind was made up at that point. You know what I mean? I was just gonna play. So, and ironically, I did get an ed degree, by the way.
Okay.
But I vowed never to use it.
Well, that's working out pretty well for you, I would say, right?
Yeah, it worked out so far. Yeah. Like, I was doing gigs when I was 14, 15. I was doing club dates. My father used to drive me to weddings because my brother was able to get me into that world. Cool. As a really, really young guy. But I don't want to say that it came easy, but there were certain things about playing drums was at least for where I was from and for the people I was playing with, it was good enough. Right around the time I was a senior in high school going into college, around that time, I got really serious into it. I became a practice maniac. And Gotcha. Around that time, I remember I took one lesson with Frankie Malaby.
Oh, wow.
And I took one lesson with Joel Rosenblatt.
At the Frankie Malaby at the Collective?
Center.
Oh, at Drum Center. Right.
Both of them.
Yeah.
And I can remember that time. At that point, I remember when I took a lesson with Joel, I was enamored by, I had gone through that whole Joel and Weckl and Vinny thing. Like, I'm the perfect age for that stuff, man. I just turned 51. It's like, that was the kind of fusion I was listening to. I'm not actually old enough to have gone through the Mahavishnu and the Chick stuff. I was like listening to like John Patitucci's solo records, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
And, like, that was the fusion I was kind of coming up with. And I remember like being so excited to take a lesson with Joel, because, like, this is the guy that plays with Michelle Camille. It was like, I was like, wow.
It's like you see him at the Blue Note,
Crazy.
And he's ripping it up, and then you're taking a lesson with him.
Yeah. And I remember going in there and we played, and I remember he's like, I must have played something, and he goes, you want to just play fours? And I was like, okay. Like, I didn't, and we just played for a while, and it was mostly playing. It was not a lot of talking. And then he stopped at one point, and he's like, you practice with the click, don't you?
Nice.
Remember, he said that. And then he was really cool, man. He's always been super, super cool to me over the years. Nice. And I remember being real excited about that. So yeah, other than that, it was really mostly my brother, man. Mostly my brother. My brother is the guy that got my stuff together. He's the one that opened up everything for me.
Kevin,
in terms of, the stuff he was listening to, and he knew like, I was just lucky that both my brothers, they were listening to the good stuff. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And he saw through the I remember being in a talent show. I borrowed my brother's drum set in like ninth grade, and I played a drum solo for for the talent show. And I took he had a thing called a Sinair. It was a like a flying saucer looking
Yeah.
electric thing, and it went boo when you hit it. And I had it plugged into my brother John's Roland guitar amp, a Roland Cube.
Wow.
And I was playing a solo, and my brother, who's on the side of the stage, he goes, "Just play a groove." He yelled out at me
Wow.
in the middle of me like playing Diarrhea. And I remember I just went, I kind of stopped and I went, boo, bop, boom, boom, pop, boo, bop. And all of a sudden the audience went crazy.
Yeah. So you studied one lesson with Frankie Malabé, one lesson with Joel Rosenblatt, which I was going to see those. Joel play with Michelle Camilo as well, and Weckel, and then
Yep.
later on it was like Cliff Almond and Zach Danziger, who's like,
Oh, dude, I that was a life changing for me. And I hung with Zach last night actually.
did you?
I did.
Dude.
I went to see Wednesday Night Titans. One of the best things I've seen in years. I can't wait to go back. It's so ridiculously awesome and hysterical. And there were no bands. Kids were not playing in bands where I grew up. I think that kind of had started to go away.
Right.
So I was never in a band. I never had like guys that I went to high school with get together and jam. Like that never happened for me.
Okay.
But I was playing weddings on weekends though, 15, 16, and I was making good money.
Yeah.
And it was training me. It was training me to like I learned at a young age, like you gotta, like I felt like sometimes you feel like you think you're a sports car and you're in traffic, right? but it teaches you to, like, even if you can pull something off, you have to do it in a way that people can't be getting lost, and not everybody you play with can hang, and you have to be cognizant of that. I mean, the biggest thing of all is, I guess when you're young, it's going to happen to a certain degree. But from when I was young, I always, mostly probably because my brother, it's always been drilled into my head, like, play the tune that you're playing. Like,
right.
Stop. Like, if you have the it doesn't matter what ability you have, like, just play what's given to you and do your best with that. And that's the repertoire you use is, your decisions are going to be made pretty easy if you stay true to that. And you can always add your own flavor in there, and whatever it is that you're listening to, it's going to find its way through. It may take longer, but if you're patient, you won't make enemies on the way, because you're serving the music. I mean, it's kind of simple. I know it's easier said than done, but yeah. So playing at a very young age professionally, I was used to being the one that said, "Okay, everybody, this is where it's at."
Yeah.
I was driving the bus very young, and then anything beyond that, we'll see. But I'm never going to let that center it's never going to be weak.
Right.
Or at least I'm going to try. You know what I mean? And when you do that, bass players tend to love you.
Yes.
And guitar players tend to love you. And drummers won't always be high-fiving on the side of the stage when you're playing, but that's okay.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's so true, man. Because it's like, it's not about you in the moment. It's about the song, right? It's
Yeah,
like
the song is king.
The song is king. The song is the client. You got to serve the song.
Yeah. We always, and everybody says it. Everybody talks about song. Everybody talks about pocket.
Yeah.
But it still eludes most people, because there's something in there where it's like, just like, not playing a fill every 4 bars doesn't mean you're grooving. Right? It's like, man, I don't know. I feel like it's the reason why for me anyway, if I listen to someone like Charlie Drayton or Steve Jordan, like, there's plenty there going on there.
Yeah. Right.
You may not hear it on any given song, and those guys will never be dated. They will never sound dated either. There's certain people that you can, they have a sound like, yeah, that guy's kind of from the 70s. It just sounds like that. These guys will never have that stuck to their names, because they're deep. Somehow, maybe they have me snowed, but to me, it's deeper than all that. And that's why they do what they do. There was a jam, and I sat in and played one night, and a guitar player named Ted Kumpel heard me
Yeah.
play, and that's kind of like the start of it for me because Ted had a band called Gnome Sane, and all original music. It was like if Frank Zappa and Prince had a baby. It was like a lot. It was funky, but it was like zany and very filled with comedy. And in the band, man, it was Ted, who's a killer, Tony Shear, who's an unbelievable bass player, and a guy named Andy Middleton playing saxophone. And it was the kind of gig where I was 100% green. It's actually a gig that Matt Miller plays with now.
Oh, okay.
Matt, I think may have been the very first drummer to ever do that gig. So Matt's kind of been in and out of that band over the
Oh,
years. But at the time, with the lineup that was there when I got in, it was crazy for me. Playing with Tony was like he was an alien to me. Like these guys were so far beyond me, and um, and that was the start of because Tony is a guy that went to North Texas State. I immediately became sort of accepted by all the guys that went to North Texas around the time that Tony did. Right.
wow.
Because, what happens is all these guys come from different, there's guys that go to Miami University, North Texas, Manhattan School of Music, all the places. And they ultimately, a good portion of them always wind up for a certain period of time in New York. They give it a
Right.
try.
Yeah.
And and from being in that band, that Gnome Sane band, it kind of tied me in. It was almost as if I went to school there. That's
Right.
how powerful it was, having a guy like Tony as an ally. And same thing with Ted and Andy. They went to Miami University. And all of a sudden I was sort of reaping the benefits of having gone to one of those schools without ever having gone.
It's like
You
here's
know what I'm
your
saying?
here's your honorary degree. You're in the club now.
Yeah. Yeah, it was crazy, because that's really what happens in these schools. It's like, I'm
Right.
sure you learn and you get better, but the real fringe benefit is the guys that you're there with at a given time, they're like this forever.
Yeah.
You're always going to look out for the guy you went to school with, if you think he's worthy or she's worthy. So
Right.
that started happening, and as soon as you get into these, you start falling into these pockets. It took me actually out of Long Island, and I was playing more in Manhattan, and everything started to change at that point.
Wow.
And the same thing with the Berkeley guys, and meeting people that went to Berkeley that were kind of my age. And even though I didn't go, I was kind of running in those circles.
Got it.
And so Teddy was the first one to help me get into those circles. And then David Mann, a great sax player, I met this guy on a club date.
Right.
And he from playing one club date, I wound up recording with him and his brother Ned, who has passed. But Ned was an amazing bass player, played with Mike Stern for years, played with Michelle Camilo.
Oh wow.
And so all of a sudden, I was like kind of running with that group of guys. And then the gigs really started to change at that point. Chuck Loeb, again, was the other guy he's the real thing that got me going. But yeah.
Man, so and at this point, are you still in the late teens now?
No, at this point, I'm talking about like as soon as I started college, I was basically 18, 19,
18, yeah.
in that 18, 19, 20, those years right there, those 3 years right there, I was practicing like a maniac.
Right.
I was going to college, but driving to college. And here's the other thing. I was driving every Monday religiously, even if I had no sleep. I was driving to see the Monday night band at Sweet Basil's.
Yeah.
To see Kenwood Denard, and he was blowing my mind on a weekly basis. And it was good to see him too, for me, because I was coming from watching guys like Dave and Vinny, and these guys are so beautifully slick.
Yeah.
And Kenwood at that time was so the opposite. He was as raw. He was an animal, right? And there was a thing about that I actually really loved. And I still do. There's an edge, there's an edginess to it.
Right.
And that's one of the things that's so crazy about Vinny is no matter how accomplished he's become, he never lost that ability to make it feel like when he's going for something, he just made it. And that's awesome. he doesn't just make anything. He can do anything he wants.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
he, maybe, and, part of that, I think, is when you don't play patterns that you practice, that these are things that just kind of come out of you.
Yeah.
And then it's more improvisational. So you're walking a little bit more of a wire at that point. But Kenwood personified that stuff. Seeing guys like Kenwood and Hiram Bullock, these dudes were like
Yeah.
walking the edge of disaster every time they play their instrument. And that was an awesome thing to be around.
Taking those chances while still making it feel great, right? Was he playing
Yeah.
keys when you saw him and drums?
In
Oh,
the band, yeah, the Metarhythmic Orchestra. He was just playing drums with the Gil Evans big band.
right, right, right.
So he was just playing kit. But I basically met a piano, the guy who was playing piano. There was two pianists, Gil Goldstein and Charles Blenzig. Charles Blenzig came to Nassau Community College to do a clinic,
Oh,
and I wasn't even in the jazz ensemble when I was going to Nassau. And I remember there was a bass player that went there with me. I can't believe I'm going to forget his name, but he knew me from club dates. So he's like, "Will you play with me in my bass class?" So I played with him, and the bass teacher at the college was like, "Why are you not in the jazz ensemble?" and within like days of that occurring, Charles Blenzig was at the school doing a clinic, and the bass teacher went over to me. He goes, "You need to go up there and play."
wow.
And I was like, "I don't know." He's like, "Go up there right now," because Blenzig was playing like a piano montuno. He was showing a student how to play a montuno. And he goes, "Just go there right now and get up behind those drums and play. I'm telling you to go do that right now." And I went and I did it. And as soon as I started playing, Blenzig looked up like, "Whoa, okay." And then we started playing together. And that turned into, "Man, you should come to see the Gil Evans band. I play there every Monday with this guy, Ken Denard." And it turned into like this social thing that I went every week.
Wow.
And again, that's another thing that has paid dividends for me, socially speaking. Like, after going there for a year and a half and seeing all these great musicians that they were gods to me. I remember, I moved to Brooklyn when I was 21, 22 years old, and I'm doing a session, not a recording session, just to play some music.
Right.
And one of these horn players walks in, and I'm like, "Whoa, that's that guy." And I can't remember who it was, maybe Chris Hunter, or one of these killer players.
That guy.
And
Oh my God.
I was dying on the inside, and he looked at me and he was like, "Oh, hey man, I see you around all the time." And I've said this to people in these kind of settings many times before, but I really believe it. And whether it sounds phony or not, it's just what I think. I really think that dude in that moment, he was looking for a reason to want to like me before I played.
Right.
Like, I had been around. He sees me all the time. I was always hanging around seeing Charles Blenzig, and even though I was there to see Kenwood, I wasn't hanging with Kenwood. But Charles was always really cool. He always took time to introduce me to people and always say hi. And so this guy just assumed, whether it's right or wrong, he was looking for a reason to not hate me, and that makes a first impression musically way easier.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And that's why that's the social part of it. Like, you can sit in your basement and practice all day, and I don't care how good you get, if you're not out there and moving with people and seeing people, and you need both.
Yeah.
You need both.
The hang is just as important, if not at times more important, than just working on your skill set alone. Yeah.
I mean, and for me, I'm still shy. I'm introverted until I know somebody.
Right.
Right. And now that I'm older, and man, once you have a kid, you start to realize, like, it really puts things into perspective.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I can remember when my son, shortly after my son was born, I was going to go and do a gig with somebody who I really respected and I hadn't played with yet. And then it literally popped into my mind. Like, I thought about my son for a second, and I was like, who am I worried about right now? Let's play.
Yeah.
You know what
Wow.
I'm saying? And it musically was awesome for me, because it put all that frivolous stuff was like, yeah, come on, give me a break. This is the real deep stuff.
Yeah.
Now I can actually play music because I don't care anymore.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it was liberating.
Wow,
you know. But
that's a
when you're young, it's hard when you don't have that. If you
yeah,
don't have that perspective, and plus, if you're good, you generally know what good is, and
yeah,
then you hold yourself to those standards. And if you're not quite there, you think no one could possibly like you. So,
right,
but you got to go for it, you
yeah,
know.
yeah. Like, what would be if there's young students in here? There's a few. What would be your biggest piece of advice? You know, from like that young age to start taking steps in the right direction.
In terms of the social aspect of
Yeah,
it,
yeah,
yeah, I mean, as soon as you're allowed to be in a club, get there.
yeah,
Literally,
definitely.
you got to go. You got to go through that period where you show up and you don't get to talk to anybody.
Yeah,
Maybe you go every week for 9 months. So what? Because eventually you're going to meet somebody.
yeah,
You know what I'm saying? Or you may see somebody there that you played with in another way, in another time.
yeah,
As many musicians as there are, at the end of the day, it's a really tiny sample size, and you start to realize everybody knows each other. You know, so yeah, I can't. To me, the social part of it is, and I don't even think I'm good at it. Now it's again, it's funny and it's kind of phony, but it's real. When you start doing certain kinds of gigs, um, you don't have to fight as hard when it comes to negotiation for money, let's say,
yeah,
or sometimes people just there's a lot of assumptions that go on when you get a good gig. Now, usually, if you get a good gig, it is pretty safe to assume that you can play, but it's not always true.
right,
There's some guys that don't have a gig that are really bad, as in a good way.
right.
So you know, you gotta get out.
Yeah,
You just gotta get out and talk to people and let them know that you play. I mean, you don't want to be cocky. That's You definitely don't want to be
right.
that.
Yeah,
Be cocky when you're playing,
yeah.
not with your mouth, but
Not with
with
your mouth.
this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. And like you were saying earlier, I mean, the thing about meeting musicians like on club dates, it's amazing how many different guys come through on club dates. And I was saying this maybe to Ryan last week. Um, Tom Bones Malone was on a heavy duty Hasidic gig with me. I was subbing on a Hasidic Jewish wedding, and he was playing trombone. And I was like, "What the hell are you doing here?" And he goes, "Same thing you are, making money." I was like, "Yeah, yeah, I guess so." I was like, "Man, I'm thinking
yeah,
in my
yeah,
head like, why are like ex Zappa musicians, playing weddings, but everybody's working, man. It's like, and the bread was good for that night. But
yeah,
again, that's you never know who you're gonna meet, who you're gonna get a chance to play with, so you got to bring your A game and
yeah.
and talk to people. Like go up to everybody and talk to them. Was Chuck Loeb the first like next tier kind of gig that came up?
Uh, yeah. The first, well, just prior to Chuck, I was playing with Dave Mann and Ned Mann, and it was through Dave's recommendation that I got the gig with a sax player named Nelson Rangel.
Yeah.
And I remember he called me up. He goes, I didn't know who he was, and he was like, I live in Denver. I'm getting ready to do a tour. Dave Mann said that I should call you. The gig is yours if you want it. Like I didn't even audition, nothing,
Wow.
just purely on Dave's word. So that was the first sort of like, I guess, artist that I was playing that kind of music. Nelson was the first